I am fluent in 7 languages, sir. Her quiet declaration hung in the air, effectively silencing the Duke. Welcome, dear listeners, to a journey beyond the gilded gates of aristocracy, to a world where the echoes of ancient titles reverberate against the quiet strength forged in the crucible of hardship. This is the tale of Clara Santander, a woman upon whose young shoulders rested the burden of a tarnished family name, and of Don Felipe de Mendoza, a duke imprisoned within the icy confines of his own unyielding pride. Our story unfolds within the imposing halls and amongst the melancholic, overgrown gardens of a centuries-old Spanish palace. Here, we will witness how true love isn't born of calculated convenience within the circles of nobility, but rather blossoms in the tender soil of shared silences, in the language of unspoken gestures, and in the audacity to defy traditions etched in stone over generations. Before we immerse ourselves in this world, I invite you to share where you're joining us from. Leave your city, your country in the comments below. We're eager to know that our stories transcend geographical boundaries, reaching hearts in every corner of the world. And if this tale resonates with your soul, please consider subscribing to our channel and leaving a like. Your support empowers us to continue crafting narratives that warm, inspire, and ultimately transform. Now, take a deep breath, allow your eyelids to gently close, and allow me to transport you back to the year 1849. Our location, the Palace of Almeza, nestled in the province of Castile, Spain. The wrought iron gates, adorned with the ducal coat of arms, a rampant lion fiercely guarding a weathered castle, groaned like an ancient lament as the carriage lumbered through. These were symbols of power, immutable as stone against the relentless winds of time. Clara Santander nervously clutched the worn shawl of her grandmother between her gloved fingers, that faded piece of wool imbued with the last vestige of familial love she had ever truly known. At 26, she was considered past her prime by society's unforgiving standards, already marked by the lonely shadow of spinsterhood. Yet, her brown eyes, as tranquil and deep as mountain lakes on a windless afternoon, held a spark that the years had failed to extinguish, a quiet, unwavering dignity. The Palace of Almeza loomed before her, a fortress of impossible dreams carved from honey-colored stone, bathed in the warm glow of the Castilian sun. 3 stories high, it housed 47 rooms, each echoing with 400 years of history and whispered secrets. Formal gardens, sculpted according to rigid French geometry, attempted to tame the wild, untamed heart of Spain. Everything here breathed permanence, tradition, the crushing weight of generations past. And she, the daughter of a silk merchant swallowed by gambling debts, arrived with only a single trunk containing 3 mended dresses, a handful of treasured books salvaged from the auction of shame, and a rosary, its wooden beads worn smooth by the countless prayers whispered within the walls of the convent of Santa Catalina over 18 long years. Amparo, the head housekeeper, a woman whose face was a roadmap of wrinkles earned through decades of unwavering service, greeted Clara at the servant's entrance with a gaze that seemed to measure and weigh her very soul. 52 years of unwavering loyalty to the Mendoza family had taught this woman with calloused hands to read people as one reads the sky before an impending storm. "Señorita Santander," she said, her voice laced with a curious blend of compassion and thinly veiled warning. "Welcome to the Palace of Almeza. Your 4th predecessor lasted a mere 3 weeks, the 5th only 8 days. I trust you understand the nature of this employment." Clara nodded in silent acknowledgement. She knew the story all too well. 5 governesses in 18 months, each failing to withstand the formidable temperament of the widowed duke, a man who had transformed his grief into an impenetrable suit of armor and his loneliness into a formidable title. Don Sebastian, the head butler, appeared in the corridor, a solemn shadow gliding through the dimly lit space. 60 years weighed heavily on his stooped shoulders, yet his eyes retained the sharp, discerning gaze of one who oversaw 23 servants and knew every secret that lurked within those ancient walls. "His Excellency awaits in the main drawing room," he announced, his words carrying the weight of a royal decree. The drawing room stole Clara's breath away. Soaring ceilings adorned with intricate Baroque frescoes, crystal chandeliers that captured and refracted the afternoon light like prisons of shimmering fire, jacaranda furniture crafted by anonymous masters over generations. And in the center of it all, dominating the room above the marble fireplace, was the portrait of a woman of ethereal beauty, the late Duchess Leonore de Aguirre Sandoval. Her eyes, the color of a summer sky, her cascading black hair, her smile hinting at secrets of unspeakable tenderness. Dead for 4 years, she remained a ghostly presence, lingering in every shadow of the palace. And before the portrait, his back to Clara, stood a solitary male figure, contemplating his deceased wife with a posture that spoke of both unyielding rigidity and utter defeat. Señorita Santander. The voice was deep, cultured, and as cold as tombstone marble. Don Felipe Enrique de Mendoza y Castilla, the Duke of Almeza, turned slowly. He was a man of 35, but mourning had ensnared his youth, encasing it in a layer of amber. Streaks of silver already threaded through his raven hair, a premature aging that his years did not warrant. Dark, deeply set eyes held the look of something buried alive, an imposing presence that needed no crown to convey the weight of noble generations. On his right ring finger, he wore the ducal signet ring, a lion and castle meticulously engraved in golden onyx. Santander, he said, the surname sounding like an accusation. Your father owed money to half the merchants in Burgos, and now his daughter presumes to educate the future Duke of Almeza. The blow was precise, calculated to wound. Clara felt the color rise in her cheeks, yet she held her chin high. 18 years of silent discipline in the convent had taught her that there was a dignity that no debt could stain. My father made mistakes, Your Excellency, but I am not defined by his mistakes, nor by my own. I am defined by what I have learned, what I have read, what I teach. Pretensions, Felipe said, circling her like a general inspecting a new recruit. The agency claimed you speak 6 languages. A convenient exaggeration to impress desperate dukes. I speak 7 languages, sir, Clara corrected him, her voice unwavering. And I did not exaggerate about any of them. Then you are a fool for being honest. In this house, Señorita Santander, remember your place. You govern children. You do not offer opinions on matters of the duchy. You teach basic French and mathematics. You do not develop pretensions above your station. Is that clear? Clara took a deep breath. In the convent, the Mother Superior used to say that humiliation was a test. It either shattered or forged. Perfectly clear, Your Excellency. Good. Don Sebastian will show you to your quarters. You will meet the children tomorrow at dawn. Good night. She was dismissed as if she were a common servant. She turned to leave, but something made her pause, a flicker of defiance. Perhaps it was the stubbornness that no convent had ever managed to fully tame. Your Excellency, she said. Yes. His voice was pure ice. I thank you for the opportunity, and I promise you that your children will learn not only languages, but something far more precious. That knowledge is the only title no one can ever take from us. Felipe stared at her, his expression unreadable. For a fleeting second, something seemed to crack in his marble armor, a chink in his carefully constructed facade, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. We shall see, Señorita Santander. We shall see. That night, in the small room near the stables where the governesses were traditionally housed, Clara unpacked her meager belongings. Her grandmother's rosary was placed reverently on the bedside table, and her books were stacked with care. Cervantes, Dante, Shakespeare, Goethe-worn volumes whose margins were filled with notes scribbled in 7 different languages, silent testament to countless nights spent studying by candlelight, the defiant act of a poor girl who had resolved that poverty would not define the limits of her mind. She knelt by the narrow bed and prayed, not for success or acceptance, but for the strength to always remember who she was. Outside, in the darkness of the gardens, a nightingale sang its mournful song, a melody so filled with loneliness that it seemed to echo the lament of the entire palace. Dawn arrived veiled in a creeping mist that transformed the gardens into a watercolor painting, a surreal mirage suspended between dream and wakefulness. Clara awoke before the morning bell, donned the simplest of her 3 dresses, a gray garment bearing invisible patches meticulously sewn by candlelight on nights of forced economy, and pinned her hair into a severe bun. She had learned in the convent that a modest appearance was armor against envy, that humility in dress could disarm criticism before it was even voiced. She walked through the silent corridors, where portraits of long-dead duchesses seemed to judge her with eyes of ink. Her footsteps echoed on the marble floor like unspoken accusations. Imposter, plebeian, daughter of a bankrupt. But she kept her chin high. If those blue-blooded women intended to scorn her, they would at least find her with her head held high. The children awaited her in the second-floor schoolroom, a large, airy space with tall windows overlooking the neglected orchard. The scent of chalk dust and old paper mingled with the faint aroma of polished wood. 3 small figures sat as still and immobile as portraits in a gallery, dressed in the perpetual black of mourning, an oppressive darkness that stretched beyond the boundaries of reason and health. Tomas, the heir, was 13. His shoulders already stooped beneath the invisible weight of primogeniture. His eyes, identical to his father's, dark as moonless nights, were guarded, like secret vaults, carrying responsibilities that no boy should bear. He sat ramrod straight, his hands resting on the antique oak table, fingers intertwined with the practiced composure of an adult, a miniature prince already rehearsing for the throne that would one day be his. There was a palpable rigidity about him, the air of one who had learned far too early that the public display of emotion was a sign of weakness. Diego, 10, was surreptitiously concealing something beneath his desk. Ink-stained fingers hinted at a secret. Not pen ink, but the telltale hues of watercolors from a hidden drawing, a forbidden art. There was a contained restlessness within him, like a bird trapped in a gilded cage, one that still remembered the boundless sky, still dreamed of flight, even though it knew its wings were clipped. He shifted nervously in his chair, his eyes constantly darting away whenever Clara looked his way, betraying a guilt for indulging in a passion his father would surely disapprove of. And Isabel, 7 years old, possessed hair as black as her deceased mother's, braided into perfect plaits that some weary maid must painstakingly redo 3 times a day. Her eyes, the color of a summer sky, seemed to have witnessed far too much for one so young. They had seen their mother wither away, watched their father transform into a living statue of grief. She did not look at Clara, nor did she seem to look at anything at all. Her gaze was fixated on her own pale hands, clasped tightly in her lap, fingers as thin as winter branches, skin almost translucent, like a child who spent too much time confined within darkened rooms. "Good morning," Clara spoke softly, as one would when approaching a timid deer in the woods. "My name is Clara Santander. I will be your new governess." Silence followed, devoid of hostility or even curiosity, just that chilling absence that was worse than outright rejection. The blank indifference of those who had seen too many governesses come and go, who had learned not to form attachments, because attachment only amplified the pain when the inevitable departure occurred. "The last one said that too," Tomas said, breaking the silence with a voice that strained to sound adult, mimicking his father's clipped tone. "She lasted 3 weeks. The one before her 8 days. How long will you last, señorita?" "I do not know," Clara replied with an honesty that seemed to catch him off guard. She pulled up a chair and sat, not as a teacher assuming a position of authority before her students, but as an equal joining them around the worn table. The gesture was a breach of protocol, and Tomas arched an eyebrow, an almost perfect reflection of his father's, the Mendoza gesture that conveyed disapproval without uttering a single word. "Father Ignacio says I must be perfect," Tomas continued, a slight crack now appearing in the adult voice he struggled to maintain. "I will be the duke. I will govern these lands, represent our lineage. Cannot fail. To fail would be to dishonor 400 years of Mendozas." "And who said that to be human is to fail?" Clara asked gently. "My father." The word came out like a death sentence, the syllables hanging heavy in the air of the schoolroom, a grim verdict. Clara understood then with painful clarity. These children were not being educated. They were being sculpted into statues, molded into marble replicas of a man who had forgotten how to be human, who had mistaken his title for his very identity. She stood and walked to the window, her soft footsteps on the wooden floor echoing loudly in the oppressive silence. Outside, the neglected orchard stretched its gnarled branches against the gray morning sky, trees that had not been pruned since the Duchess's death years ago. Wild apple trees, laden with small, imperfect fruit, far too sour for a palace pie, but alive, stubbornly, obstinately alive. "Look at those trees," she said, pointing. "No one has cared for them for years. They grow crooked, without symmetry, without the precise shape a gardener would demand. Their fruit is not fit for the ducal table, yet they continue to live, continue to bear fruit, even if it is imperfect. Imperfect, but alive. What does that have to do with Latin?" Tomas challenged, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Nothing and everything," Clara replied, turning to face them. "We will not have a Latin lesson today. Today we will not speak of declinations or conjugations of dead verbs. Today we will talk about what you love, about what you dream of when no one is demanding perfection." For the first time in months, Diego spoke, his voice hesitant and barely audible. Can I show you my drawings?" Something in that timid request broke the ice. Clara nodded, and Diego pulled out from under the desk not one notebook, but three. A pile of papers tied together with string, hidden away and guarded like a precious treasure. They were drawings of fantastical cathedrals, impossible castles, bridges that defied the very laws of gravity. He possessed a raw, instinctive talent that no master had yet refined, but which already hinted at genius. They are very bad," Diego stammered, bracing himself for rejection. "They are extraordinary," Clara replied, and she saw the boy's eyes fill with unshed tears. "You have a gift, Diego. Do not waste it by hiding it away." Tomas watched them, his expression a mixture of distrust and something more, a yearning he couldn't quite name. "And you, Tomas?" Clara asked, turning to him. "What do you dream of when you don't need to be perfect?" The boy hesitated, then whispered so softly that Clara almost didn't hear him. "I dream of just being Tomas. Not the future duke. Just a boy who can make a mistake without dishonoring generations." And then Isabel, whom no one expected to speak, whispered a single, broken word. "Mama!" Clara felt her own tears welling up. She approached the girl and knelt to bring herself to the level of her wide, blue eyes, eyes that did not blink. "You can talk about her," she said softly. "You can cry for her. Mourning is not weakness. It is love that has nowhere else to go." And for the first time in 4 years, Isabel cried, sobbing in the arms of a stranger who, at that moment, became something far less so. Clara held her close, rocking her gently, while Tomas and Diego watched as if witnessing a miracle unfold before their very eyes. There was no formal lesson that day, only conversation. Diego proudly displayed all his drawings, years of hidden work brought to light. Tomas admitted that he was consumed by a gnawing fear of disappointing his father, a terror that kept him awake at night. Isabel asked to hear stories about the mother she was slowly forgetting. At the end of the afternoon, when the bell rang, the 3 children didn't want to leave. It was the first time that the schoolroom had felt less like a prison and more like a sanctuary. That night, when Clara finally retired to the small room near the stables, exhausted but strangely hopeful, Don Sebastian appeared at her door. He knocked gently, waited to be invited inside. "Señorita Santander, I am obliged to inform you that His Excellency observed the lessons today." Her heart froze. She had broken protocol, ignored the prescribed curriculum, allowed the children to cry, and now this. She managed to choke out a single question. "And?" He said nothing. He only observed. The butler hesitated, uncharacteristic emotion flickering across his usually impassive face. "In 4 years, Señorita, it is the first time I have seen him enter the children's wing. 4 years since the Duchess died, and today he came in. He stood in the corridor, the door slightly ajar, watching. He did not intervene. He did not issue orders. He did not criticize. He only observed. Was he angry? I cannot say what he was feeling, señorita, but when he left, I saw something in his face that I have not seen since before the Duchess passed away. Don Sebastian paused, searching for the right words. It looked like hope. After he left, Clara lay awake in the darkness, listening to the palace breathe, the sounds she was slowly learning to recognize. The creak of ancient wood, the wind whistling through the long corridors, the distant tolling of the chapel bells. And she realized something both frightening and exhilarating, that the entire house lived suspended, waiting for someone to break the spell. Servants, children, even the Duke himself, all trapped in a cycle of mourning that had become their very mode of existence. She didn't know if she possessed the courage to break such an ancient, so deeply rooted spell, but maybe she didn't need courage. Maybe she just needed stubbornness, and stubbornness she had in abundance. December arrived with torrential rains that transformed the gardens into faded watercolor washes. Clara had been at the palace for a month, and the children's transformation, though subtle, was as real as the shifting of seasons. Tomas smiled, not always, but sometimes when Diego told jokes about clumsy knights. Diego drew openly, and his sketches of imaginary cathedrals hinted at a talent that even his own father had yet to recognize. Isabel whispered the word "Mama." Just once, that first night when Clara was rocking her after a nightmare, but it was a start. Felipe observed. Clara felt the weight of that ducal gaze whenever she walked through the corridors, whenever she taught in the schoolroom with the door left ajar. He did not interfere. He did not offer praise. He merely watched, like a scholar observing an experiment whose outcome he could not yet predict. It was Don Sebastian who brought the news that would change everything. "Señorita Santander," he announced, appearing at the schoolroom door one Friday afternoon, his expression unusually grave. "His Excellency requests your presence in the ducal office immediately." The office was a masculine sanctuary, reeking of power. Walls lined with dark oak, portraits of 10 generations of dukes, gazing critically down at the present. An antique globe where Spain still dominated half the world. Felipe stood by the window, his hands clasped behind his back in a rigid, almost military posture. "Señorita Santander," he said without turning. "In 2 weeks, we will receive important guests. It will be a diplomatic dinner. Castilian nobles, the French ambassador, representatives of the court, matters of politics and alliance will be discussed." Clara waited, not understanding why she was being informed. "The children will remain in their rooms. They are not yet ready for society." Now he turned to face her. "You, however, will join us at the table." "Me?" Clara couldn't mask her astonishment. "But I am a governess, Your Excellency. It is simply not appropriate." "I decide what is appropriate in my house," he said, his voice like tempered steel. "I want them to see the type of servant I employ. I want them to know that even the governesses here meet unattainable standards." Understanding chilled her. He wasn't inviting her. He was exhibiting her, like a trophy or a warning. "As you wish, Your Excellency. Dress appropriately. Amparo has a dress that will fit. It does not need to be elegant, merely presentable." Humiliation had become so familiar that Clara barely felt it anymore. She merely inclined her head slightly and withdrew. Ambassador Philippe Renard, a middle-aged man with impeccably groomed mustaches, was discussing the intricacies of a trade treaty with Felipe in rapid French. Clara, seated 8 places down the long table, observed the tension etched in the Duke's shoulders. He did not fully understand the complex language of trade. He tried to disguise his ignorance with diplomatic platitudes, but he was clearly lost in the technical jargon that blended commerce and politics. Renard, sensing the Duke's unease, became slightly impatient. "Concernant less preferences tarifaires pour less textiles Catalans." "So, Mr. Duke, concerning the preferential tariffs for Catalan textiles." Felipe improvised a response that was clearly incorrect. Clara saw the flicker of discomfort on the ambassador's face, a potentially damaging misunderstanding that could ignite a diplomatic incident. Without thinking, she spoke, her French flawless and fluent. Ambassadeur, permettez-moi de clarifier. Monsieur le Duc souhaite clarifier. Mr. Ambassador, allow me to clarify. I believe His Grace wishes to clarify. Silence fell like a guillotine blade. All eyes turned towards her. Felipe first paled, then flushed crimson. Clara corrected the misunderstanding with 3 precise sentences, her words chosen with the care of a seasoned diplomat. Renard visibly relaxed, a smile returning to his face. The Marquesa de Salazar raised a surprised eyebrow, and the Dowager Duchess of Osuna, a matriarch whose power at court rivaled that of the Queen herself, leaned forward, intrigued. Felipe struggled to maintain his composure. Madame Renard, the ambassador's wife, attempted to salvage the situation with brittle civility. Quelle surprise! A governess who speaks French. Then, testing the waters, she quoted Dante in fluent Italian. Clara effortlessly replied with a quote from Petrarch, also in Italian. The dinner had unwittingly become a linguistic spectacle, a showcase of Clara's extraordinary talent. She fielded a question in English, responded to a pointed comment in German. The nobles watched in disbelief, their whispers rippling through the room like a gathering storm. Felipe gripped his wine glass with such force that it threatened to shatter. When the dinner concluded and the guests began to move to the drawing room, Felipe beckoned Clara over, his voice low and lethal. Is Señorita Santander collecting languages to compensate for a lack of lineage? Clara felt years of accumulated humiliations, of being belittled for her surname, her poverty, her audacity in pursuing an education, surge within her like a tidal wave. She stood up, her spine ramrod straight, and faced him squarely. I speak 7 languages, Your Excellency, she declared, her voice ringing with crystal clarity in the now silent room. French, Italian, English, German, Portuguese, Latin, and Spanish. I learned them not to impress dukes, but because kind nuns loved me more than my own blood, because books were my family when no one else wanted to be, and because knowledge, Your Excellency, is the only title no duke can ever take from me. She turned and walked away, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. Behind her, the Duchess of Osuna murmured loud enough for everyone to hear. Astonishing! Not even my granddaughter, educated in Paris, commands such mastery of languages. And then, fixing Felipe with a steely gaze, be careful, young duke. Dismiss this girl, and you will be remembered as a fool. But Clara did not hear. She was already ascending the grand staircase, trembling, knowing that she had just signed her own expulsion. Clara did not sleep. She packed her trunk methodically, folding her 3 dresses with meticulous care, wrapping her precious books in protective layers of paper. By dawn, she would be ready. She would not wait to be formally dismissed. She would leave with her dignity intact. But dawn arrived, and Don Sebastian did not knock at her door with an order to depart. At 8 o'clock, Amparo appeared, not with a dismissal, but with a coffee tray. The wrinkled face of the housekeeper betrayed a rare look of perplexity. His Excellency wishes to see you in the winter garden after breakfast. The winter garden was a glass-enclosed greenhouse at the rear of the palace, created by the late Duchess to cultivate roses that could not withstand the harsh Castilian winter. No one had ventured inside since her death. Felipe had kept it locked, an untouched sanctuary of memories. Clara found him standing among the overgrown rose bushes, without a coat, dressed only in a shirt and waistcoat, his hair disheveled as if he had not slept. He held a wilting red rose in his hand, its petals falling like dried tears. Señorita Santander, he said without turning. Clara, may I call you Clara? It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sudden intimacy was more unsettling than the previous formality. As you wish, Your Excellency. Please, he said, gesturing around the room. In this place, among dead roses, dispense with the title. He turned to face her, his eyes bloodshot and filled with an unspeakable sadness. My wife cultivated these flowers. She said that fragile things deserved extra care, a lesson Felipe learned far too late. He hadn't listened, always consumed by ducal affairs, and then Leonor was gone. The crushing weight of misaligned priorities descended upon him only after her death. Clara remained still, a quiet observer. When Leonor fell ill, I could have summoned the finest physicians from Madrid, even from the royal palace itself, Felipe confessed, his voice cracking with remorse. But my pride, that damnable Mendoza pride, whispered that a duke doesn't beg for assistance, that it would be seen as weakness. So I called the local doctor, a man clearly out of his depth, and she died. I killed her with my arrogance. Clara watched tears trace paths down his aristocratic face, a stark contrast to the hardened facade he usually presented. In that moment, she understood he wasn't a monster, but a broken man, clinging to his title as his only remaining armor against a world that had shattered him. Your Excellency, last night, you humiliated me before ambassadors, before the Duchess of Osuna, whose mere opinion can obliterate careers, he interjected, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. And you know what I realized? You didn't humiliate me. I humiliated myself by being petty, by being cruel, by wielding a title like a weapon against someone who deserved respect. He approached Clara, stopping a respectful 2 steps away. The proximity felt charged, thick with an unspoken tension that neither dared acknowledge. Forgive me, he said, the words stripped bare of all artifice. Not as a duke, but as a man. Forgive me for being small when you have always been great. Clara felt her own tears welling up, mirroring his pain. And the children, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Forgive them too for being human when you demand they be perfect. Felipe closed his eyes, the weight of his expectations pressing down on him. How do I do that? How do I forgive them when I don't even know how to be a father? It starts by showing up, Clara dared to say, gently touching his hand. Just show up. Have dinner with them. Listen to Diego's explanations of his drawings. Read stories to Isabel before bed. Talk to Tomas about his fears. That is all. Show up. What if I fail? Then you will fail, she replied, her gaze unwavering. Surrounded by love, which is infinitely better than triumphing surrounded by emptiness. Felipe held her hand, his grip surprisingly tight. The touch was electric, a forbidden current coursing between them, defying the chasms of class, tradition, and centuries of rigid rules that separated a duke and a governess. Yet, there in the decaying beauty of the winter garden, surrounded by wilting roses and misted glass, they were simply a man and a woman, both profoundly alone, both broken, both desperately trying to relearn what it meant to be human. Stay, he asked, his voice raw with vulnerability. Not as a governess, but as... He hesitated, searching for the right word. As family. Be family to us. Please, Clara whispered, nodding, unable to articulate the torrent of emotions within her. When she left the winter garden, the sun had pierced through the oppressive clouds, bathing the palace of Almeza in a warm golden light. For the first time in 4 years, it felt less like a tomb and more like a home. December arrived with a flourish of snow, large, lazy flakes that transformed Almeza into a breathtaking Gothic fairy tale. The children, emboldened by a newfound sense of freedom, ventured into the gardens for the first time in recent memory. Felipe not only allowed it, but joined them. Clara watched from the window, her heart swelling with hope, as the Duke of Almeza, a man whose words held sway over regional politics, painstakingly constructed a lopsided snowman that elicited peals of laughter from Diego, laughter that echoed through the once silent halls. That night, something fundamental shifted within the palace walls. Felipe decreed that dinner would be served not in the grand banquet hall, with its imposing mahogany table designed for 24 guests and steeped in the formality of 3 generations of dukes receiving royalty, but in the family room, gathered around the small, round table where Leonor used to preside over their intimate family meals. Tomas arrived first, his expression wary, suspicion clouding his young features. Are you here because Father Ignacio ordered it? He challenged. Felipe removed the ducal ring from his finger and placed it on the table, the gold glinting in the candlelight. The gesture was symbolic, a temporary abdication of his title. I am here because I want to be, he said, his gaze meeting his son's directly. Tonight I am not the Duke. I am just your father. Isabel, hesitant, approached him, her small hand reaching up to tentatively touch his bearded face. Felipe closed his eyes, and Clara witnessed centuries of Mendoza pride melting away like snow in the warmth of the sun. Papa, Isabel whispered, a word she hadn't uttered in 4 long years. Are you back? Yes, my little one, I am back. After the children were asleep, Felipe sought out Clara in the library. She was meticulously cataloging the new books he had recently acquired, an impressive investment in education that had raised eyebrows throughout the region. Clara, he said, her name sounding almost too intimate in the vast room filled with the weight of knowledge. I need to ask you something. What is it? Teach me to read, he pleaded, his voice laced with vulnerability. Not as my tutor did, with a switch and humiliation, but as you teach my children, with patience and understanding. Clara turned, genuinely surprised. But you know how to read. I do, but... He hesitated, the confession clearly painful. I have difficulty. The letters dance on the page. They always have. My father dismissed it as stupidity, a lack of effort. I have never read an entire book in my life. And I want to read to Isabel. I want to understand these French texts you discuss with Tomas. I don't want to be an ignorant man masquerading as a nobleman. Clara understood. Undiagnosed dyslexia, transformed into a secret shame, a burden he had carried in silence, like all Mendozas carried their wounds, hidden beneath a veneer of wounded pride. It is not stupidity, she said softly, her voice filled with compassion. Your mind simply works differently. I can teach you a method that will help. Thus began a nightly ritual. After the children were asleep, Clara and Felipe would meet in the hushed sanctuary of the library. She employed colors, assigning red to verbs and blue to nouns, developing a visual system that bypassed his difficulties. Slowly, painstakingly, Felipe began to decipher the written word. The first book he completed was Don Quixote. As he reached the final page on a cold January night, the fire in the hearth casting a warm, golden glow throughout the library, Felipe closed the volume with reverence. He fought windmills, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Like me. And he was called mad, as they probably call me. The difference, Clara replied softly, is that you stopped fighting windmills. You started fighting for something real. Felipe raised his eyes, his gaze meeting hers. The distance between them, separated only by the reading table, was a mere matter of inches. Yet it felt as vast and insurmountable as an ocean. I am in love with you, he confessed, the words hanging in the air between them. And this is impossible, Clara whispered, her breath catching in her throat. Why? Because I am a duke, and you are unworthy of everything I should have always been. He finished, taking her hand in his. You are worthy of everything. Of titles, of honors, of love. And I am just a man who woke up too late to who he should have been. Felipe. Hearing her own name spoken on his lips was almost too much to bear. He leaned in and kissed her. A kiss that transcended the boundaries of duke and governess. A kiss between a man and a woman who had found in the ruins of their shattered lives the glimmer of hope for reconstruction. When they parted, both were trembling, shaken to their core. This cannot happen, Clara insisted, her voice barely above a whisper. I know the court will never accept it. I know I will be socially ostracized, destroyed. That is why I cannot ask you. Then don't ask, Felipe finished, his hands trembling in hers. I cannot ask you to marry me. It would be to condemn you. Clara stood up, her movements deliberate, her resolve hardening. Let me decide. And she left him alone, surrounded by thousands of books that he could finally read. Yet none of them held the answer to the agonizing dilemma tearing at his heart. January bled into February, a fever dream of unrelenting snow and heavy silences. Felipe and Clara moved through the palace like satellites, orbiting each other without ever truly touching, trapped in an impossible gravity. The children noticed the palpable tension. Tomas observed them with the keen perception of someone trying to decipher a complex enigma. Diego drew portraits of the two of them, unconsciously capturing their unspoken longing. Isabel clung to Clarara's hand with a desperate need, as if fearing she would lose another mother. It was Father Ignacio who finally forced the issue. A man of 70 years, he had baptized 3 generations of Mendozas and feared no duke, earthly or otherwise. He summoned Felipe to the confessional, not to hear his sins, but to deliver a hard-earned truth. Your Excellency, I watched your grandfather destroy lives with his pride. The priest said, his voice unwavering. I watched your father die bitter, consumed by regret for never having truly loved. Do not make the same mistakes. She is not noble, Felipe argued, clinging to the familiar shield of societal expectations. She is the daughter of a bankrupt merchant. If I marry her, you will be happy, Father Ignacio retorted, cutting him off. And frankly, Your Excellency, after 4 years of watching you die alive, happiness is worth more than the approval of the court. It was on a blustery February afternoon that Felipe finally found the courage to act. He found Clarara in the Winter Garden, a place that had become their sanctuary, a haven where titles held no sway. He didn't kneel, nor did he recite flowery pronouncements of love. He simply sat beside her on the cold marble bench, amidst the roses that were tentatively beginning to awaken from their winter slumber. Clarara, if I asked you to marry me, the scandal would be national, he said, his gaze fixed on his hands, as if searching for answers there. The court would repudiate me. Other nobles would question my sanity. I could lose political influence. My children would be ridiculed. Doors would close. Clarara didn't reply, allowing the weight of his words to settle between them. But if I don't ask you, he continued, finally turning to face her, his eyes filled with raw emotion, I will lose the only thing that truly matters. The chance to be happy, the chance to be a man before being a monument. Felipe, marry me. He took her hands in his grip firm and reassuring. You will be Duchess of Almeza. Our children will be looked at askance, our doors avoided by half of society. But it will be us, complete. You and I, and 3 children who need a father and a mother, not statues. Clarara felt tears streaming down her face, a mixture of joy, fear, and overwhelming love. What if I don't want to be a duchess? What if I just want to be Clarara? Then you will be Duchess Clarara, and that will be more than enough. She looked at him for a long time, seeing not the duke, but the man, seeing not the title but the heart. And she understood that there are moments that define an entire life, and this was hers. I have conditions, she said, her voice firm and resolute. Never prevent me from teaching. Never. Never use your title. Things deserving of extra care were often the very things he neglected. He knew this now with agonizing clarity. If only he had listened to that quiet voice of reason, the one drowned out by the clamor of ducal affairs. Leonor was gone, and the crushing weight of his misprioritized life settled upon him. Clarara remained silent, offering a stillness that allowed Felipe's anguish to fill the space. His voice cracked, a sound alien to the imposing Duke of Almeza. When Leonor fell ill, I could have summoned the finest physicians from Madrid, even from the royal palace itself. But my pride, that damnable Mendoza pride, whispered that a duke doesn't beg for assistance. It would be a sign of weakness. I called only the local doctor, a man clearly out of his depth. He didn't know what to do, and she died. I killed her with my pride. Tears traced paths down his aristocratic face, a sight that pierced Clarara's heart. In that moment, she saw not a monster, but a broken man, clinging to his title as the only shield left to protect him from the world's harsh judgment. Your Excellency, last night, Clarara interjected softly, breaking the heavy silence. You humiliated me in front of the ambassadors, before the Duchess of Osuna, whose mere opinion could shatter a career. And you know what I realized? You didn't humiliate me. I humiliated myself by allowing myself to feel small, by being cruel, by wielding my position like a whip against someone who deserved only respect. He approached Clarara, stopping just 2 steps away. The nearness was unnerving, charged with an unspoken tension, a feeling neither dared to acknowledge. Forgive me, he said, the words raw and unadorned. Not as your duke, but as a man. Forgive me for being so small when you have always been so great. Clara felt her own tears welling up, mirroring his pain. And the children, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Forgive them too, for simply being human when you demand they be perfect. Felipe closed his eyes, the weight of his paternal failures pressing down on him. How do I do that? How can I possibly forgive them when I don't even know how to be a father? It starts by showing up. Clara dared to gently touch his hand, a gesture both audacious and comforting. Just show up. Have dinner with them. Listen to Diego's stories about his drawings. Read to Isabel before bed. Talk to Tomas about his fears. That's all it takes. Show up. What if I fail? Then you will fail, she replied, her voice laced with a quiet certainty. But you will fail surrounded by love, which is infinitely better than triumphing amidst emptiness. Felipe held her hand, his grip firm. The touch was electric, dangerous, almost impossible. A duke and a governess, worlds separated by chasms of class, tradition, a century of rigid social rules. Yet, there, amidst the faded beauty of the winter garden, surrounded by dying roses and fogged glass, they were simply a man and a woman, both profoundly alone, both broken, both desperately trying to learn what it meant to be human. Stay, he pleaded, his voice a husky whisper, not just as a governess, but as, he hesitated, searching for the right word, as family. Be family to us. Please. Clara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. When she finally left the winter garden, the sun had pierced through the heavy clouds, bathing the palace of Almeza in a soft golden light. For the first time in long years, it felt less like a tomb and more like a home. December arrived with a gentle hush, large, slow snowflakes transforming Almeza into a Gothic fairy tale. The children, emboldened by a newfound freedom, rushed out into the gardens, their laughter echoing through the once silent halls. Felipe not only allowed it, he joined them. Clara watched from the window, her heart swelling with warmth, as the Duke of Almeza, a man whose words held sway over regional politics, painstakingly built a clumsy snowman that made Diego laugh until his small stomach ached. That night, a tangible shift permeated the atmosphere. Felipe decreed that dinner would be served not in the grand banquet hall, with its imposing mahogany table fit for 24, where 3 generations of dukes had received kings, but in the cozy family room at the small round table where Leonor used to gather her loved ones. Tomas arrived first, his brow furrowed with suspicion. Are you only here because Father Ignacio ordered it? Felipe, in a gesture that spoke volumes, removed his ducal ring, the symbol of his power and authority. He placed it on the table, a symbolic, temporary abandonment of his title. I am here because I want to be. Tonight I am not the Duke. I am just your father. Isabel, hesitant and unsure, cautiously approached him, her small hand gently touching his bearded face. Felipe closed his eyes, allowing centuries of Mendoza pride to melt away like snow in the spring sunshine. Papa, Isabel whispered, a word she hadn't uttered in long years. Are you back? Yes, my little one, I am back. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Felipe sought out Clara in the library. She was meticulously cataloging new books he had ordered, an impressive investment in education that had already surprised the entire region. Clara, he said, his voice sounding strangely intimate in the immense room lined with towering shelves of knowledge. I need to ask you something. What is it? Teach me to read. Not as my tutors did, with a switch and endless humiliation, but as you teach my children, with patience and understanding. Clara turned, genuinely surprised. But you know how to read. I do, he admitted, his voice laced with vulnerability. But I have difficulty. The letters, they dance on the page. They always have. My father said it was stupidity, a lack of effort. I have never read an entire book in my life. And I want to read to Isabel. I want to understand these French texts you discuss with Tomas. I want to stop being an ignorant man disguised as a nobleman. Clara understood then. Undiagnosed dyslexia. a secret shame that he had carried in silence, a burden added to the weight of Mendoza pride. "It is not stupidity," she said softly, her eyes filled with compassion. "Your mind simply works differently. I can teach you a method that will help." And so began a nightly ritual. Every evening, after the children were tucked into bed, Clara and Felipe met in the library. She used colors, red for verbs, blue for nouns, developing a visual system that circumvented his difficulties. Slowly, painstakingly, Felipe began to read. The first book he managed to finish was Don Quixote. When he reached the last page on a cold January night, the fire in the fireplace casting the library in a warm, golden glow, he closed the volume with reverence. "He fought windmills," he said, his voice hushed with emotion. "Just like me. And he was called mad, as they probably call me. The difference," Clara replied, her voice gentle, "is that you stopped fighting windmills. You started fighting for something real." Felipe raised his eyes, his gaze meeting hers. The distance between them, leaning over the reading table, was a mere matter of inches, yet it felt as vast and impossible as an ocean. "I am in love with you," he confessed, the words hanging in the air. "And this is impossible," Clara whispered, her breath catching in her throat. "Why?" he pleaded. "Because I am a duke, and you are unworthy. Everything I should have always been." He reached out and held her hand, his touch sending shivers through her. "You are worthy of everything, of titles, of honors, of love. And I am just a man who woke up far too late to who he should have been." Felipe. Hearing her name spoken on his lips with such tenderness was almost too much to bear. He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't the calculated kiss of a duke and a governess, but the desperate, heartfelt kiss of a man and a woman who had found, in the wreckage of their broken lives, the faint glimmer of hope for reconstruction. When they finally parted, both were trembling. "This cannot happen," Clara said, her voice barely audible. "I know the court will never accept it. I know I will be socially destroyed. That is why I cannot ask you." Felipe pulled away, his hands shaking. "I cannot ask you to marry me. It would be to condemn you." "Then don't ask." Clara stood up, her voice filled with a newfound resolve. "Let me decide." And she left him alone, surrounded by thousands of books that he finally knew how to read, but which held no answers to the agonizing dilemma that tore at his heart. January dissolved into a feverish blend of unrelenting snow and heavy silences. Felipe and Clara moved through the palace like distant satellites, orbiting each other without ever touching, trapped by an impossible gravity. The children noticed the change in atmosphere. Tomas observed them both with the keen gaze of someone trying to decipher a complex enigma. Diego drew portraits of the two, unconsciously capturing the tension he couldn't understand. Isabel clung to Clara's hand with a desperation that spoke of a child's fear of losing a mother figure once again. It was Father Ignacio who finally forced the issue. A man of 70 years, he had baptized 3 generations of Mendozas and feared no duke, no matter how powerful. He summoned Felipe to the confessional, not to hear his sins, but to deliver some hard truths. "Your Excellency, I watched your grandfather destroy lives with his unyielding pride," the priest said, his voice firm. "I watched your father die bitter and alone, regretting that he had never truly loved. Do not make the same mistake." "She is not noble," Felipe argued, his voice laced with desperation. "She is the daughter of a bankrupt merchant. If I marry her, you will be happy," Father Ignacio interrupted, cutting him off. "And frankly, Your Excellency, after watching you slowly die for the past 4 years, happiness is worth far more than the fleeting approval of the court." It was on a crisp February afternoon that Felipe finally found the courage to confront his fears. He found Clara in the winter garden, a place that had become their sanctuary, a space where titles and social hierarchies seemed to fade away. He didn't kneel before her, nor did he use flowery, romantic words. He simply sat beside her on the cold marble bench, amongst the roses that were just beginning to awaken from their winter slumber. "Clara, if I were to ask you to marry me, the scandal would be of national proportions," he began, his gaze fixed on his own hands. The court would repudiate me. Other nobles would question my sanity. I could lose all my political influence. My children would be ridiculed and ostracized. Doors would slam shut in our faces. Clara remained silent, patiently waiting for him to continue. But if I don't ask you, he turned to face her, his eyes filled with a raw honesty. I will lose the only thing that truly matters. The chance to be happy. The chance to be a man before being a monument. Felipe. Clara reached out and took his hands in hers, her voice trembling with emotion. Marry me. He tightened his grip on her hands, his knuckles white. You will be Duchess of Almeza. Our children will be looked at with suspicion, our doors avoided by half of society. But it will be us, complete. You and I and 3 children who need a father and a mother, not statues. Clara felt the tears streaming down her face. What if I don't want to be a duchess? What if I just want to be Clara? Then you will be Duchess Clara, and that will be more than enough. She gazed at him for a long moment, searching his eyes. She saw not the duke, but the man. She saw not the title, but the heart, and she finally understood. There are choices that define an entire life, moments that forever alter the course of destiny. This was her moment to choose. I have conditions, she said, her voice firm, betraying none of the turmoil within. First, you must never prevent me from teaching. Never. Second, never use your title to silence me. Never. And third, if I become Duchess, I will use that title to do good, to create a school, to educate the people of these lands. The Duchess will not be an ornament. She will be an agent of change. Felipe smiled. A genuine, heartfelt smile, the first in many years. I would not expect anything less. Then yes, she said, her voice filled with a joyous certainty. Marry me, Felipe Enrique de Mendoza, and let us scandalize the whole of Spain. Their kiss was witnessed only by the roses, but somehow the entire palace seemed to sigh with relief, as if holding its breath for centuries. The news spread like wildfire through dry straw. The Duke of Almeza was going to marry a plebeian governess. The Madrid newspapers exploded with sensational headlines. The court seethed with gossip and disapproval. And then there was the Mendoza family. Don Rodrigo de Mendoza e Velasco, Count of Trevinho, Felipe's cousin and the presumptive heir to the duchy, arrived with an entourage of 8 people and a funeral expression etched upon his face. Felipe received him in the throne room, a theater of power used only on occasions of utmost seriousness. He sat in the ancestral ducal chair, the ducal ring glinting on his finger, a posture that brooked no argument. Clara was present, obliged by protocol to witness the proceedings in silence. Cousin, Rodrigo began, his voice controlled but vibrating with suppressed anger. As a member of the Mendoza bloodline, I must protest this abomination. A governess, the daughter of a disgraced merchant? This stains 400 years of lineage, a lineage that dates back to the Catholic monarchs. His wife, Eulalia, chimed in, her voice dripping with disdain. Think of Queen Isabel. Think of the court. A plebeian as a duchess. It is an affront to the very idea of nobility. Felipe did not move, his gaze unwavering. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of generations. As the reigning Duke of Almeza, a grande of Spain, I do not answer to counts. I answer only to the crown, and the crown has not offered an opinion. Because it is too ashamed to do so. Rodrigo shot back, his face flushed with anger. If you insist on this madness, I will take the case to the Council of Nobility. I will question your mental capacity to govern the duchy. I will argue that mourning has driven you mad. He had gone too far. Felipe stood up slowly, his imposing presence filling the room. Clara Sant'Anda. He pronounced each word with deliberate emphasis, as if issuing a solemn sentence. Has more nobility in one finger than you have in your entire family tree. She speaks 7 languages. She saved a diplomatic negotiation you wouldn't even begin to understand. She is transforming my children from emotionless statues into vibrant, compassionate human beings. And most importantly, She has reminded me that a man is more than a coat of arms. Your children will be social bastards. Rodrigo spat out, playing his final, desperate card. Tomas will never be accepted as the next duke if you marry her. Then we will break with this rotten society, Felipe declared, his voice ringing with conviction. He walked to the door and flung it open. Don Sebastian, escort the Count out and remove the Trevinho coat of arms from our alliance records. It was a virtual banishment, a severing of ties that had existed for centuries. Rodrigo turned pale, his face contorted with rage. You will regret this. The only thing I regret, Felipe said, his voice filled with a quiet sorrow, is taking 35 years to learn that love is worth more than the hollow approval of hypocrites. The next morning, an unannounced carriage rolled through the palace gates, bearing a distinguished aristocratic coat of arms. It was the Dowager Duchess of Osuna, a formidable matriarch whose power in the court rivaled that of kings. Felipe received her with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. The elderly woman entered the drawing room, leaning heavily on an ebony cane, her sharp eyes assessing everything with a critical gaze. A young duke making waves, she stated without preamble. I have come to offer my support. Felipe blinked, completely taken aback. Your Grace, my late husband married for dynastic convenience, she interrupted, settling into a chair without waiting for an invitation. A blatant display of power. We spent 40 miserable years together. He sought solace with mistresses, while I festered with resentment. When he finally died, I felt relief, not grief. Relief, you have found love. That is worth more than the approval of the entire court combined. But society, she banged her cane sharply on the floor. Society is filled with hypocrites who secretly envy your courage. With my patronage, half of them will grudgingly accept it. The other half have always envied the Mendozas anyway. She turned her attention to Clara, who had entered the room to serve tea and stood motionless, unsure of what to do. Come here, girl. Clara approached, her heart pounding in her chest. The matriarch took her hands in hers, examining them closely. Working hands, not the idle hands of an aristocrat, she observed. These hands have known hardship. These hands have real value. You will be a better duchess than half the women who carry the title by birth. She turned back to Felipe, her eyes twinkling with amusement. Marry her quickly, before the vultures organize a formal opposition. And so, with the unexpected blessing of one of Spain's most powerful women, the path ahead became a little less impossible. The wedding was set for February, 6 weeks of frenzied preparation that transformed the palace into a hive of activity. But before the celebrations could begin, there was protocol to observe, including notifying Queen Isabel II. The response arrived in an envelope sealed with the royal stamp. Felipe opened it, his hands trembling almost imperceptibly. His Excellency is within his rights to choose a consort. The crown does not interfere in matters of the heart. It was diplomatic, neither explicit approval nor outright condemnation, but it was enough. The queen would not stand in their way. Clara, true to her word, sewed her own wedding dress. It wasn't white, as that would have been seen as excessive pretension, but a rich, dark blue velvet, the color of the Mendoza coat of arms, with delicate lace on the cuffs that Amparo lovingly helped to embroider. The Duchess of Osuna, as a sign of her support, lent Clara a family heirloom, a stunning sapphire necklace that had once belonged to a queen 3 centuries ago. Felipe, not to be outdone, commissioned a new ducal ring specifically for Clara. He didn't want to use Leonor's. That would have felt disrespectful to her memory. The new ring featured the Mendoza coat of arms intertwined with a pair of open books, symbolizing that knowledge was now an integral part of the family's legacy. And he did even more. He created a ducal office specifically for Clara, an unprecedented move that shocked the court. Duchesses were typically ornaments, not active participants in governance. But Clara would be different. Her official title would be Duchess Consort of Almeza and Educator of the Ducal Lands. The wedding day dawned with clear skies and a biting February air that caused ice crystals to sparkle like diamonds in the gardens. The palace chapel had been prepared to accommodate 200 guests. 60 nobles brave enough to attend, 140 commoners, and, notably absent, 2/3 of the Castilian nobility and Rodrigo's entire family. However, the Duchess of Osuna was present, seated in a place of honor, along with the Marquis de Salazar, Ambassador Renard, a subtle diplomatic gesture from France, and 5 nuns from the convent of Santa Catalina, who had traveled 12 long days to see the girl they had educated become a duchess. The bishop-priest of Burgos, whose presence was secured through the intervention of the Duchess of Osuna, would officiate the ceremony, a clear signal that the church approved of the union. Clara entered the chapel not on the arm of her deceased father, but led by Tomás. The 13-year-old heir, dressed in a miniature ducal uniform, was the perfect symbol of acceptance. The future duke welcomed the new duchess into the family. Felipe waited at the altar, his eyes glistening with tears, his first public display of emotion in 4 long years. The bishop-priest read the traditional vows, but Felipe had requested permission to add his own words. "I promise to honor you not as a duke to a duchess, but as a man to a woman, not as a lord to a subject, but as an equal to an equal. I promise that our love will be stronger than any scandal, that our union will be more real than any title." Clara replied, her voice clear and strong. "I promise to be a duchess worthy of this people, even if I am never fully accepted by the court. I promise to use this title not to elevate myself, but to elevate others. And I promise to remind you always that a true man is measured not by a coat of arms, but by the size of his heart." When the bishop-priest finally pronounced them husband and wife, Clara signed the ducal register with a hand that, surprisingly, did not tremble. She was now the first plebeian duchess in 400 years of Almeza history. The chapel bells rang out, their joyous peals echoing through the countryside, and for the first time in centuries, it seemed that real change was truly possible. The celebration lasted for 3 days, a Mendoza family tradition. But it wasn't just an empty display of pomp and circumstance. It was a genuine communion. Nobles mingled with commoners, children from the villages played in the formal gardens, and musicians played not only courtly minuets but also lively Aragonese jodas that made even the austere Duchess of Osuna clap her hands in time with the music. On the 3rd night, when the last of the guests had finally departed, Felipe and Clara stood alone on the terrace, overlooking the vast ducal lands that now fell under her responsibility as well. "Are you afraid?" he asked, his voice soft. "Terrified," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I was not born for this." "No one is born for anything," Felipe said, wrapping his arms around her. "We become what we choose to be, and you chose to be courageous." Below them, in the distant villages, hearth fires flickered like earthly stars, connecting her to all those lives that were now intertwined with that of the Duchess who spoke 7 languages and sewed her own wedding dress. Clara understood then. She had not become a duchess to wear a crown, but to remove the crowns from others, to liberate them from the shackles of ignorance and poverty. March arrived with the promise of spring, a time of renewal and rebirth. Clara, now officially the Duchess of Almeza, wielded a power she had never imagined possible, and she intended to use it wisely. "I want to create a school," she announced at the first ducal council meeting that Felipe allowed her to attend. The 6 councillors, all elderly men who had managed the Mendoza properties for decades, looked at her as if she had proposed abolishing the monarchy. "Your Grace," the treasurer, Don Luis, began cautiously, "schools for the common people are unusual." "Then we will be pioneers," Clara replied, her gaze unwavering. "The cost—" "I will use my ducal dowry," she interrupted, cutting him off. "Felipe gave me 100,000 reals. 15,000 will go to the school." Felipe, present but silent due to his promise, watched her with pride in his eyes. The council, albeit reluctantly, approved the plan. The ducal school of Almeza was inaugurated in March of 1850. It was housed in an old, renovated mill building, furnished with 20 wooden desks crafted by the local carpenter. The initial enrollment consisted of 20 students, boys and girls mixed, a radical notion that scandalized even the most progressive thinkers. Clara taught personally 3 times a week. She did not delegate, she did not supervise from afar. She was there, hands dirty with chalk, ducal dress stained with ink, explaining geography to barefoot children whose parents had never ventured beyond the confines of their village. The news spread like wildfire. Duchess teaches peasants. Half of Spain mocked her, while the other half secretly admired her audacity. And then the Duchess of Osuna paid a visit to the school. She arrived unannounced in a plain carriage that stopped outside the old mill. Clara, in the middle of a lesson on ancient Rome, turned pale with surprise. The matriarch entered the building, her keen eyes examining everything. The simple desks, the hand-drawn maps, the frightened children. She sat down on a desk and listened attentively to the entire lesson. When it was over, she stood up and applauded. "Extraordinary," she declared, her voice ringing with approval. "Other noblewomen need to see this." And with that, a movement began. Progressive nobles, inspired by Clara's example, visited the school not out of empty charity, but out of genuine interest. Some even copied her model. And when Queen Isabel II sent a private letter, which was intentionally leaked to the press, saying, "Admirable educational initiative," everything changed. If the Queen approved, the court had no choice but to accept it, whether they liked it or not. By October of 1850, the school had 80 students and a waiting list of 200. Clara had trained 4 new teachers, bright, ambitious young people from the common folk who had been denied opportunities due to their humble backgrounds. She taught them not only the subjects they would be teaching, but also the methods, the patience, and the encouragement they would need to inspire their own students, instilling in them the belief that knowledge had the power to transform lives. One of those students, Elsie, a 10-year-old girl with astonishing intelligence, learned to read in just 3 months. In 6, she was reading basic French. Clara secured her a scholarship to study in Burgos, making her the first plebeian girl from the region to receive formal education beyond the most basic level. And to ensure that future generations would have similar opportunities, she established the Ducal Education Fund, allocating 10% of all income from the Mendoza lands to education in perpetuity, enshrining it in ducal law that even future dukes could not easily overturn. Felipe watched, his heart swelling with pride, as his wife transformed the duchy into a laboratory for social change. He fell more deeply in love with her every day. But not everyone embraced the changes. An ultra-conservative priest in a neighboring village began a vocal campaign against the school, decrying Clara as a heretical duchess who was educating women against God's divine will. One night, an attempted arson attack was thwarted by vigilant watchmen, but the incident was deeply unsettling. Felipe offered to provide armed protection for the school, but Clara refused. "Education does not need swords," she said firmly. "It needs dialogue." And so, she went to the priest, seeking to understand his opposition and to find common ground. She spoke with him in Latin, a language he revered. She quoted St. Thomas Aquinas on the value of knowledge and St. Teresa of Avila on the importance of female education. The priest, impressed by her erudition and genuine commitment, eventually backed down. He didn't offer his support, but he stopped attacking the school, which Clara considered a small but significant victory. November brought an unexpected surprise. Don Rodrigo returned. He arrived alone, without his wife Eulalia, who had left him, and without his entourage. He was thin, aged, and hunched over, as if the months had taken years off his life. "Cousin," he said to Felipe, his voice weak and broken, "I have come to ask for your forgiveness." Felipe received him not in the imposing throne room, but in the more intimate family office, a gesture of equality. Rodrigo confessed that Eulalia had left him, telling him that he had become bitter as vinegar, and that his obsession with his title had made him unbearable to live with. "She was right," he said, his voice choked with emotion, tears streaming down his face. "I lost my wife. I almost lost you. And for what? Empty pride. Fear that your happiness would expose my own misery." Felipe understood. His cousin was not a monster, but a man trapped in the same armor that had almost destroyed Felipe himself. "Come in as a cousin," he said, his voice filled with compassion, "not as a count. Titles cannot heal. They only push people away." Rodrigo spent 2 months in the palace, observing Clarara's tireless work, witnessing the children's blossoming spirits, and seeing the remarkable transformation of the duchy. Something within him broke, or perhaps finally was mended. He helped Clarara draft the statute for the ducal school, a legal document that protected the institution from future opposition. He even donated 50,000 reals. He extended his reformist zeal to the education fund, pouring ducal resources into its coffers. Then, one transformative Sunday morning at Mass, before the assembled congregation, he embraced Felipe in a gesture of profound humility and asked for forgiveness, a spectacle that resonated through the entire duchy. It was a symbol society, even when anchored by the weight of generations, could change. Even a man hardened by decades of entrenched tradition could learn, could grow. The year following the wedding saw changes that were nothing short of revolutionary. Tomás, now a sturdy 14, received provisional acceptance as the future duke. Though resistance lingered in the hearts of some of the old guard, a growing number of nobles began to see in the boy a wisdom and strength beyond his years, qualities that promised a sagacious leader. Diego, at 11, found himself under the tutelage of a skilled architect. Felipe, now able to truly see his son, had recognized Diego's innate talent, a recognition that would have been utterly unthinkable in the stifling atmosphere of the past. The boy filled sketchbooks with designs, fantastical schools bathed in light, hospitals designed for healing, buildings that seamlessly melded beauty and function, a testament to a spirit finally given wings. Isabel, a shy blossom finally unfurling, sang at a charity concert to benefit the ducal school. The entire court was in attendance, their applause a validation for the girl who, just months before, had been trapped in a prison of silence. Felipe, once feared and aloof, was now respected as the reformist duke, a beacon of progress. Other nobles, tentatively at first, began to consult him on matters of social reform. He even publicly sought Felipe's forgiveness during Mass one Sunday, embracing him and begging for pardon before the entire congregation. It was a powerful symbol, proof that even men entrenched in tradition could evolve. The transformation in the year following Clarara's wedding was undeniable. Tomás, now a burgeoning 14, received provisional acceptance as the future duke. Though some old guard nobles stubbornly resisted, the majority acknowledged his potential for wise leadership. Diego, at 11, flourished under the tutelage of an architecture tutor. Felipe, now attuned to his son's gifts, recognized the boy's talent, an awareness that would have been utterly impossible before Clarara's arrival. Diego sketched designs for fantastical schools, hospitals, buildings that seamlessly merged beauty and practicality. Isabel, the once mute 8-year-old, found her voice singing in a charity concert for the school. The entire court attended, showering her with applause, a girl who, just months prior, hadn't uttered a word. Felipe's transformation had earned him respect as a reformist duke. Other nobles sought his advice on implementing progressive changes. And Clarara became known as the Duchess of the People, a title bestowed not as an insult, but as a profound honor. Queen Isabel II, hearing of this remarkable woman, summoned Clarara to the royal palace in Madrid, a history-making moment as the first commoner duchess to receive a formal royal audience. The meeting was intimate, just the queen and Clarara in a private salon. Isabel, barely 20 but already weathered by the burdens of the crown, spoke with a thinly veiled envy. "I envy your freedom, Duchess. I was born a princess, never given the luxury of choice. My husband, my destiny, none of it was my own." Clarara, ever bold, replied, "Your Majesty, you can choose to be a just queen. It is a choice made daily, not a birthright." Isabel offered a wistful smile. "Now I understand why he chose you. You possess a courage that nobility of blood rarely fosters." The spring of 1851 blossomed with Clarara 6 months pregnant. Celebrations erupted throughout the ducal lands. An additional heir solidified the lineage, but more importantly, the child symbolized hope, a testament to true love, not mere dynastic obligation. The school now boasted 150 students, nurtured by 6 dedicated teachers within 3 buildings. Inspired by Almarza's success, 5 nobles from neighboring regions established similar institutions, hailing it as a guiding model. A movement was taking root, education embraced as an aristocratic responsibility, not a charitable gesture. Felipe, driven by a thirst for knowledge, began to learn English, reciting Shakespeare with an accent so hilariously dreadful that it never failed to elicit laughter from Clara. Tomás, a beacon of intellectual prowess, gained acceptance to the prestigious University of Salamanca with honors, the first Mendoza to attend a university in generations. The family's tradition had been private tutors, an aristocratic custom that fostered isolation. Even Rodrigo, Felipe's cousin, experienced a metamorphosis. He appeared weekly for dinner, always accompanied by a new girlfriend, invariably a teacher, never a noblewoman. Felipe playfully teased him that he was cramming decades of missed humanity into months of romantic fervor. One starlit evening, on the ducal terrace, Clara and Felipe pondered the future. "Are you afraid of childbirth?" he asked, gently placing his hand upon her swollen belly. "Yes," she admitted, a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "Your first wife, Leonor, died because I was too proud to call the best doctors." This time, Felipe interjected firmly, 3 doctors will come from Madrid. And if anything at all, seems amiss, I will marshal all the resources of the duchy. I will not repeat that mistake. And even so, he pulled her close, his voice thick with emotion. It will not happen. But if it does, you've taught me how to be a father. The children will be fine, and I will survive because now I know how to truly live. Clara leaned into him, finding solace in his embrace. Below, the ducal lands stretched out under the moonlight of villages, fields, countless lives inextricably linked to this woman who had dared to love beyond her station. Sometimes, she confessed softly, I still feel like an imposter wearing a crown. You do not wear a crown, Felipe whispered, kissing her hair. You are the crown. You are everything nobility should be and so rarely is. Generous, educated, courageous, humble. June arrived, ushering in labor. The 3 doctors from Madrid transformed an entire suite into a makeshift hospital. Felipe remained rooted in the corridor for 36 agonizing hours, Tomás, Diego, and Isabel keeping vigil alongside him, a family united in anxious anticipation. When the baby's cry finally echoed through the palace, Felipe collapsed in tears of relief. A girl, Clara announced. Exhausted but radiant, perfect, healthy. What shall we name her? Leonor Clara, Felipe declared, honoring the past and celebrating the future. And there, in that room where new life had blossomed, a family reunited, nobility and love irrevocably intertwined. Something fundamental shifted within the Duchy of Almarza. It was no longer a house of ghosts. It was a house of people. September brought unrest. The Nobility Council, pressured by a cabal of ultra-conservative factions, formally challenged the legitimacy of the ducal marriage. The official summons arrived in a stark black envelope, sealed with ominous red wax. It demanded that Don Felipe Enrique de Mendoza Castilla appear before the council to defend his decision to marry a commoner, an act deemed by some members as incompatible with the dignity of a Grande of Spain. It was a direct assault. If the council ruled against Felipe, they could revoke his privileges, politically isolate him, and even cast doubt on Tomás's right to succession. Felipe read the document 3 times, his jaw tight. Then he turned to Clara. I will go, he declared, and I will defend not only our marriage, but our right to choose love over tradition. Let me go with you, Clara pleaded. They do not permit women in the council. Then I will wait outside. But I will not let you face this alone. Madrid. The council convened within a centuries-old palace, a somber hall lined with portraits of long-dead nobles. 23 members, all men, all over 50. Felipe entered, resplendent in his full ducal uniform, embroidered coat, medals earned in past campaigns, ceremonial sword, signet ring. The Grand Master of the Council, the Duke of Montier, a man of 70 who personified entrenched tradition, addressed him with cold formality. Don Felipe, we have been convened due to grave concerns that your marriage to a commoner stains the noble institution. Let the accusations come, Felipe replied, his voice ringing with unwavering resolve. 3 hours passed in relentless debate, arguments that Clara lacked the proper lineage, that the children of the marriage would dilute noble blood, that he was setting a dangerous and unacceptable precedent. Finally, Felipe requested the floor. He rose to his feet, his gaze sweeping across the room. With deliberate movements, he removed the ducal ring from his finger. He placed it upon the polished table before him. This ring, he said, his voice resonating in the silent hall, I have carried for 20 years. It belonged to my father, and his father before him, 10 generations. And do you know what it has taught me? That a title is a weight, that noble blood is a prison, that true nobility is not what we inherit, but what we do. Silence descended, heavy and absolute. I married Clara Santand, he continued, his voice now filled with passion, because she taught me how to be a man, because she saved my children from becoming lifeless statues, because she created a school that educates 150 children. And if you believe that stains nobility, then nobility deserves to be stained. He picked up the ring again, its cold metal glinting in the light. He placed it back on his finger. Now decide. Take away my title if you wish, but you will not take away my love. You will not take away the legacy we are building. And you will not take away the right of my son to be a worthy duke, not just the heir to a coat of arms. He turned and walked out. The vote took 6 hours. Clara waited in the corridor, her heart a tempest of anxiety and hope. When the door finally swung open, the Grandmaster announced, by a vote of 17-6, the council recognizes the legitimacy of the ducal marriage. His voice echoed, then he added, and further, it recommends that other noble houses consider worth over lineage. Victory, not unanimous but undeniably real. Felipe embraced Clara in the council corridor, an act more scandalous than any marriage. And for the first time she used the formal title. Thank you, husband. Thank you, Duke. 10 years later, in 1861, the Ducal School of Almeza had blossomed into a sprawling educational complex, 400 students, 20 teachers, courses ranging from basic literacy to university preparation. Isabel, the prodigy, had returned with a university degree, the first woman in the province to attain higher education. She now directed the school alongside Clara. Tomás, now the Duke of Almarza at 24, having received the title early so Felipe could dedicate himself fully to education, had abolished the last vestiges of feudal practices. He often quoted, "My mother taught me that power is not for domination, but for elevation." Diego had become a renowned architect, designing schools throughout Spain, beautiful, functional buildings that democratized beauty. Isabel was studying music in Vienna, corresponding weekly with Clara in 4 different languages. And Leonor Clara, now a spirited 10-year-old, was teaching younger children to read, having inherited both her mother's gift for teaching and her father's unwavering refusal to accept injustice. Above the school entrance, Felipe had ordered an inscription engraved words that had become famous throughout the land. Asterisk here, title does not matter. The courage to learn matters. Asterisk Duchess Clara de Almarza, 1850. One autumn afternoon, Clara and Felipe sat on the same terrace where they had shared so many conversations. Now, their hair was streaked with silver, their hands marked by time, but their eyes still shone with the light of those who lived with purpose. We did something impossible, Felipe murmured. We did something necessary, Clara corrected gently. 50 schools across Spain now follow our model, he continued, a note of awe in his voice. 4,000 children educated, 3 generations of teachers trained. We changed the country. No, Clara said, her voice filled with quiet conviction, holding his hand tightly. We only started. Others will continue. Felipe raised his wine glass, a smile playing on his lips. A toast then, to the woman who spoke 7 languages, and taught me the only language that truly matters, the language of love. And to the man, Clara toasted in return, who exchanged a crown of power for a crown of humanity. Below, in the lands that now prospered, not through ducal imposition, but through collaboration, lights twinkled as families gathered for dinner, children studied by lamplight, teachers prepared lessons, life abundant and free, flourishing like roses in a garden, finally cared for. And in the palace that was no longer a fortress but a home, a family forged not from blue blood, but from courageous choices, celebrated not a title, but love. The Ducal School of Almeza operated for 60 years, educating 4,000 students before being incorporated into the Spanish public education system in 1910. Clara de Mendoza y Santander died in 1889 at the age of 66. Her funeral was attended by over 3,000 people. 3 of her students became university professors, an unthinkable feat before her arrival. Felipe de Mendoza died in 1891, 2 years after his wife. His epitaph, chosen by himself, read, "Here lies a man who learned humility from a wise woman." Tomás, the Duke, quoted in his inauguration speech, "My mother was not born noble. She became noble, and thus she taught me that true nobility is earned by actions, not inherited with a surname." The Palace of Almarza still stands, converted into an educational museum. At the entrance, the original inscription remains, read by thousands of annual visitors. Asterisk here, title does not matter. The courage to learn matters. And so, a governess who spoke 7 languages transformed a duchy, a family, and ultimately, a part of a country, not with swords or proclamations, but with books, patience, and the unwavering belief that knowledge is the only title that no one can ever take away. Her story still echoes, whispered in schools, remembered in universities, taught as an example that love and courage can indeed change the world. One word at a time, one child at a time,